Is freedom an illusion? This is a presentation over a conceptual paper written by myself, Holly Berry Wesley, at Southern Illinois University at Carbondale. Part of this course was reading Walden 2. As I read Walden 2, I had a lot of thoughts. First of all, I pictured it to be rather an idyllic setting in the countryside where people lived and worked together in harmony. In fact, in my mind, it looked similar to this picture. Walden 2 and the Illusion of Freedom. According to Skinner, freedom of choice is an illusion, a fiction of man's vanity. Instead, behavior is controlled by external influences. Is man truly free or merely a product of his environment? In the structure of Walden 2, members lived and worked together for the collective good of all. All resources were shared and work was divided amongst all members of the society. Everyone worked for an average of 4 hours per day. All chores, including child rearing, cooking, and all other tasks, were approached communally. Is this best? Well, Skinner argued that if man is to be controlled by his environment, it would be better to make the environment optimal. In this book, people's behavior was continually being shaped in a thoughtful manner. Although this is an interesting concept, in reality, most people benefit from having choices. An interesting parallel. Walden 2 came out in 1948, and so did another book, but about a dystopian society. This book was 1984, and it provided a description of what life would look like under a totalitarian government. Although the resulting environments were vastly different, they did have some common themes. In 1984, Big Brother was watching you. In Walden 2, Frasier might be watching you from the top of the quarry with his telescope. In Walden 2, they used the Walden Code to control members. In 1984, they used propaganda to control citizens. In Walden 2, they had a lack of voice in government for members. In 1984, they had a totalitarian government. Both had a lack of a system of checks and balances. Walden 2 had a purposeful breakdown of traditional family ties, whereas 1984 had a purposeful breakdown of human ties of any kind. A cautionary tale? Although both stories are far-fetched and fictional, they show what is possible when people no longer have a significant voice in matters that affect them. It is important to offer individuals with disabilities choices, as the research supports this as being the best way to increase life satisfaction and adaptive skills. Another interesting parallel. There is another interesting parallel between how the citizens of Walden 2 are treated in the novel and how adults with developmental disabilities are treated in the real world. In both cases, a person other than the person being affected is often making decisions. Case managers, direct care workers, and other staff regularly think they know what is best for a client, usually without consulting the client. What is best? Well, research has shown just the opposite to be true, that individuals with disabilities who are given more opportunities to make choices are more likely to be happier and more integrated into the community. My position is that it is important to offer individuals with developmental disabilities as many choices as possible, and also to allow them to give input into their programs and plans. Freedom has definitely been an illusion for most of these people for far too long. According to Ward and Stewart, people with intellectual disabilities are frequently denied their opportunity to live their lives according to their own interests and preferences. It is often assumed that they are eternal children, unable to speak on their own behalf and therefore not competent to make their own decisions. A brief history of the treatment of individuals with intellectual disorders. Lessons from the past. Until as recently as 1970, individuals with developmental disabilities were often subjected to intolerable conditions and improper treatments that were designed only to make patients more manageable for the people who staffed the institutions. Restraints, both mechanical and chemical, were often used. The hospital was compared to a concentration camp, and there were only 5 staff available for 5,200 patients. This was at Bryce Hospital, the scene of Wyatt versus Stickney. There was no skills programming and not enough food, beds, or shower facilities for the individuals who were housed there. Something's got to give. So in October of 1972, an individual receiving treatment at Bryce filed a lawsuit against the institution. As a result of this, the Wyatt Standards were adopted. The Wyatt Standards included humane psychological and physical environment, qualified and sufficient staff for administration of treatment, individualized treatment plans for each client, and minimum restriction of client freedom. What are the implications for caregivers? Individuals with developmental disabilities have the right to have a minimum restriction of freedom. They also have the right to rehabilitation training and certain minimum psychological and physical conditions. In 1990, the Individuals with Disabilities Act was passed, and this outlaws discrimination in public and private employment, public services, transportation, communications, technology, and public accommodations. Ethics in people with developmental disabilities. There's a tendency to treat them like children. Is it better to offer them choices, or is it better to structure an environment for maximum benefit? It is the position of this writer that allowing individuals with mental disabilities to have greater autonomy in their lives will lead to an increase in life satisfaction and improved community integration. BCBA Ethical Guidelines. Ethical guidelines. Respect the autonomy of your client. Treat others with care and compassion. Make sure your services truly benefit the client and not just the caregiver. To me, these were the three that went the best with the topic of freedom. Why do we need ethical guidelines? Ethical guidelines are needed to ensure the safe and humane treatment of individuals with disabilities. This goes directly with the ethical guideline of treating others with care and compassion. The horror stories of the recent past make it pretty clear why these are necessary. Some of the mental institutions of the past were overcrowded, underfunded, and understaffed, and simply human warehouses. A lack of appropriate supervision can lead to normal, well-intentioned people acting in cruel ways. A system of overseeing staff who work directly with clients, including behavior analysts, can help keep this from happening. It is still possible for these ethical violations to occur, but thanks to legislation and better oversight, it is getting less common. Who is benefiting from the intervention? It is also very important to be clear about who is to benefit from the intervention. An intervention is unethical if it benefits the caregiver of the individual with disabilities more than the individual himself. There are many articles in the literature that illustrate the importance of offering clients choices and increasing autonomy. A common thread among them is that by increasing clients' sense of autonomy, it is possible to also increase their sense of life satisfaction. A summary of some articles making these points follows. Self-determination across living and working environments. So this study found that people living in community settings exhibit more self-determination, and there are statistically significant differences between individuals who lived and worked in a community setting and those who lived and worked in a state-run facility, even when matched by IQ score and age. Enhanced self-determination of adults with intellectual disabilities. Again, this found that self-determination is tied with better life satisfaction, but that it is limited when you limit opportunities for choice and decision making. Smaller settings mean more opportunities to make choices, and it would appear that the chance to live in a smaller setting will lead to more autonomy, more life satisfaction, and greater adaptive living skills. The relationship between self-determination and quality of life for adults with mental retardations. In this one, they were looking to see if they could tell which group someone was in, a small group home or an institution, based on their life satisfaction scores, and indeed they could. Autonomy in residential facilities and community functioning of adults with mental retardation. This study found that greater opportunities for choice making, from trivial choices to big choices, leads to gains in adaptive behavior functioning. Balancing the right to rehabilitation with the right to personal liberties. The rights of people with developmental disabilities to eat too many donuts and take a nap. This was a great article, but it talked about how individual opportunities for choice may improve task performance, make individuals less likely to exhibit target behaviors, and have greater compliance with requests. The most significant message of this article was that habilitation and the right to choose do not need to be conflicting goals. The important thing should be teaching consumers to make choices and integrating their choices into the treatment plans. According to Bannerman, all people have the right to eat too many donuts and take a nap. This is good news for me because those are two of my favorite things. Behavior modification and the principle of normalization, clash or synthesis. Normalization refers to the social reevaluation of the learner and a quality of life in which the learner is exposed to less punishment and more reinforcers. However, it's not really practical to consider that you're never going to experience aversive stimulus. Sometimes moderate punishment can lead to better interventions for challenging target behaviors. It is important to remember that both normalization and behavior modification share the goal of developing a better quality of life for the individual with a developmental disability. While the principle of normalization calls for reducing exposure to punishment as much as possible, this might not be exactly considered normal. People without disabilities contact aversive contingencies as a result of making poor choices every day. Any questions so far? After reviewing the literature, it is tempting to say that freedom of choice is the most important thing one can offer a client with developmental disabilities. However, it is important to remember that behavioral controls are neither good nor bad as such, but they can easily be misapplied. Skinner himself stated that we are all controlled by external stimuli, but this does not amount to the same thing as manipulation. He also stated that we are a product of our environment, but we can still be offered choices and control over daily activities. Are we ever truly free? While Skinner argues that man is not truly free, others will argue that being free from aversive stimulation is a form of being free. Can you escape aversive stimuli? While avoiding aversive stimuli sounds like a good idea, in reality, most of us learn a lot through the school of hard knocks. It's how I learned how not to touch the hot stove or bother the sleeping dog. The problem with eliminating aversive consequences from a setting is that it remains almost impossible to remove them from every setting, and it is better to know how to deal with them in advance. Skinner contributed many things: a science of behavior, ways to teach autistic children language skills, ways to teach adults with developmental disabilities daily living skills, and we have to be careful to balance between using the science of behavior and offering choices to form an individual's treatment plan. Why offer choices? It is the opinion of this writer that the freedom to choose is very deeply ingrained behavior. It appears that choices help individuals with intellectual disabilities to develop to full potential, so that likely affects all of this. Also, even if freedom is an illusion, it is not to easily be dismissed. It may help provide the bedrock that causes life to flourish. Okay, implications for research. This is a long blog here. Basically, I would like to see more quantitative studies done with behavioral research, measuring target behaviors in different settings. Although this paper may not have convinced anyone that freedom is more than an illusion, it is the opinion of this writer that it is still an important important concept. Self-determination and autonomy are related to better adaptive behavior skills, less target behaviors, and greater life satisfaction for individuals with developmental disabilities. Therefore, it is the responsibility of all who work with individuals with disabilities to teach them how to make choices and let them do it whenever possible. This will allow people who have been deprived of choice and social integration for too long to finally achieve these goals. Just remember, not all those who wander are lost. Just because someone doesn't do the same things the same way as you doesn't mean they're wrong or they're lost. They just may be exercising their freedom to choose. Thank you for listening to my presentation.